Welcome back to the Band Guide, where we use GarageBand to create professional sounding music. I'm your band guy, Colin, and today we are finally mastering our song. If you've been following along, you know that this is a video in the Ultimate GarageBand Beginner's Guide series where we've walked through everything from the first time you open up GarageBand to export out your finished, mixed, and mastered song. And we've recorded and mixed a song, and now we're finally mastering it together in this series. So if you haven't seen the other videos, definitely go back and check them out. And before we get into today's video, I want to give you something. In addition to this video series, I've also put together the Ultimate GarageBand Guide. It's completely free from link in the description below. This guide walks through recording, mixing, mastering. It's going to cover the process that we're talking about here in this video today so that you can just quickly reference back to it anytime you're working on recording, mixing, mastering, anything inside GarageBand. It's really the Ultimate GarageBand Guide, and it's completely free from link in the description below, so be sure to pick it up. But let's go and get into today's video where we're talking about mastering, and we're actually going to go through the mastering process together. Now, mastering, I think a lot of people miss or they get confused with mixing, and I get it because there is a lot of overlap. I was confused by this for a long time. Ultimately, mixing and mastering are two separate functions. They overlap in some of the tools they use, but you have different goals. In mixing, you're making your song work together. All the individual tracks, your guitar, your bass, your drums, whatever, work together in that one individual track, so blending those together. And then in mastering, you're taking that finished mix and you're bringing it up to commercial volume, and you're balancing the tone across either other songs that you've released against other commercial releases, or if you're working on a project that has multiple songs, making sure that the tone of all those songs next to each other works really, really well together. So they are two distinct processes, and because of that, you should treat it separate from the recording and mixing process. You should create your own mastering session. If you haven't already seen the video that we did yesterday where we're setting that up, definitely go check that out. And in that process, you're really focusing on three things: the tone, the dynamics, and then making it loud, which is something I'm sure we're all looking for. If you've been frustrated when you take your song out of GarageBand, you try to play it on Bluetooth or on headphones or in your car and it's super quiet, that's because it's not mastered yet. So we're going to jump in and look at this inside GarageBand, but first I just want to really quickly walk through the idea of what it means to make something loud, because I think a lot of people get confused by this. So there is a point that's called digital zero that you can't go past in your computer. That is the top loudest point, period. No one can go past it. Pro engineers can't go past it. You can't go past it. So that is the loudest point that we can get to. So where our song is actually quiet has nothing to do with anything relative to just like pushing it up to some unknown level. The fact is this level exists for everybody. The secret is containing the dynamics of our song. So if our song is super dynamic and has this super wide dynamic range, then the bulk of our song is going to live kind of down in this range. Whereas a pro mix and mastered song, they're going to do really, really subtle things throughout the mixing and mastering process to shave off some of the dynamics in a way that sounds good and bring that mix way up so that it's louder. Because if you hear a song up towards here, where the bulk of the song is up towards here, it's going to sound louder than a song that's way down here, right? Now you can overdo this and smash your mix up against the top, and it's going to seem loud because it's all the way up near the loudest point that it could possibly be, but you are losing all of your dynamics. So you constantly are working this battle of containing the dynamics in a way that is letting you get more volume out of it, but also not completely squashing it into just like a thin little weird sounding mix. I know Metallica's gotten a lot of hate over the years for just absolutely destroying their masters. And this is something to do with the loudness wars. We can't really get into that in this video, but if you're interested, definitely look up the loudness wars online. But my goal for you is to be thinking through always balancing the idea of loudness and dynamics. You don't want to make your song sound worse just because you're trying to get it loud. And there's been a pushback on that over time where you will start to see modern releases that aren't as loud as previous releases from that same artist. There's a band called Bleachers that I love. I really, really respect them. They have some songs that are mastered super, super loud. I mean, like -6 LUFS, which you'll see LUFS here in a second. And they've been slowly walking that back, and their newest record is mastered at a much more conservative level and has way more dynamic range because of that. So just something to know as we're getting into that. We're going to try to explain this best as we can in the session. Speaking of, let's go and dive into this session here. And you'll see, the first thing I want to point out is you see all these little peaks. If I zoom in here, you can see them a little bit better. Those peaks are the dynamics, and those points, they're short, so we don't hear them particularly well. So by trimming them down a little bit in the dynamic controlling process, we can get more loudness out of our song, and our song will sound bigger and fuller. Okay, so first things first, we are breaking this out into three parts: tone, controlling the dynamics, and making it loud. And the way we make it loud also is containing the dynamics. You'll see that in a second. And we are starting with tone, and we're going to do that with just EQ. when we get to making it loud, that's when things like the meters that we set up on our master meter over here are going to be important, right? But when we're just focusing on tone, that doesn't really matter. Again, if you haven't seen the video on setting up this session, definitely go check that out. But in short, the way we've set up our session is that we have the song that we're mastering here, then we have the processing on that song under the track here, and then on the master over here, we are looking at the loudness when we get to that stage. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and start dialing in the tone. Now, there are way more steps that you can do in the mastering process, but these three are the fundamental three that all masters have for the most part, and are the three that you should focus on early on. Over time, slowly you can consider working in some more advanced techniques, but generally speaking, just start with these three and they can get you what you need in the mastering process. So first we're going to focus on tone. Now with tone, you want to cue your ears into other professional mixes and other mixes that you've done to get a sense of what your mix might need. So listen to those. I can't show that on this channel because copyright and all that stuff. So keep that in mind, and let's go ahead and just listen through our song here and determine what we think tonally we might need. And we're going to dial in just a little bit more of that with EQ here. So let's just go back to kind of this intro area. Okay, so the first thing that I hear is that I think I want to bring out a little bit more bite and a little bit more presence in the upper mid-range. Maybe try to bring out a little bit more sheen in the brighter frequencies, see if I can get it just sounding a little bit higher fidelity. And then I think there's a little bit more low end and like warmth in that area that I want to try to bring out as well too. And then maybe we'll look at bringing in a little bit more just general low end as well. But let's go ahead and start with just bringing in that bite that's going to be more in the presence range. So let's see if we can find that. Generally, it's going to be somewhere around here. And you just want to sweep in the range where you think it might be, because not all of these sections across this EQ are equal. If you haven't already seen my video on EQ, definitely go check that out. I'll link to that above here. But we want to be thinking in the range, where can we find, and then sweep within that until you hear something that's just working for you. Trust your ears. If you like it, then it's good, right? And once we find that, then we're going to dial it back to 1 to maybe 3 decibels. But generally speaking, in mastering, we're going super, super subtle here. So 1, maybe 2 decibels is generally where I'm starting. But let's try to find that frequency range first.
What?
I think somewhere around here, maybe. I'm gonna make it a little bit narrower. You can adjust your Q down here. This will make it wider if it's a lower Q, tighter if it's a narrower or higher number Q. I'm just going to try to find the sweet spot. And if you're working on a newer GarageBand, you can also do that with these points right here. I'm just going to try to find a sweet spot where I'm getting what I want, but not more than I want.
Just in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
Cool. Okay. That's working pretty well for me. Let's go ahead and try to dial in just a little bit more of that high fidelity sheen. That's going to be up in this like super bright area range. And I'm going to do this with a bell. You could do this with a shelf, which is going to be everything from here and above. I think I just want to do this with a bell. So I'm going to use this point here. Let's see if we can find this sound. I think somewhere way up there is working for me, and we're just going to do a gentle slope up to it. And again, just like 1 to 2 decibels. Let's see if we can find it here.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
Cool. It's subtle, but it's already bringing out a little bit more, just higher fidelity sheen and tone to this song, and then this is cutting through a little bit more with that like 1.5K. Okay, let's pay attention now into the warmer low end area, which we're going to find down in this region.
But I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in this.
So it starts to sound like almost muddy right up here for me. But I think I was over something that was feeling pretty good around here.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
Okay, cool.
but I'm still standing here.
And let's just see about just a little bit more sub. Oop, threw that off there. Let's put that back where it was. A little bit more sub with this low shelf here.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place.
Cool. Okay. So really, really subtle. You might have already noticed there's a pretty big difference though. The last thing we need to do though, just to make sure we like what we've done, is balance the output volume here. So because we've done all boosts, I'm just going to turn this down a little bit on this output volume
Universe expands.
until it sounds like it's the same volume off and on. Okay, let's listen to this off and on and notice that there's just this subtle tonal shift here.
But I'm still standing here.
Stop.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place.
It's subtle, but it definitely pushes us in the direction that we want. And you want to be doing that in this mastering stage. You're not trying to fix things. You're just trying to push yourself in the direction that you want. Okay, so now that we've gotten our tone right, let's just tame the dynamics a little bit more. And we're going to do that with Buster SE here. Now, if you haven't seen my video where I break down compression a little bit more generally, I'll link to that above here. In general here, though, we're just going for a little bit of very, very subtle containment of the song. So we want a really, really low ratio. So 1.5 to maybe 2 to 1. So either of these first two options here. And then we want generally a really slow attack time so we can let the punch of the drums through, but contain them a little bit. And then generally a slower-ish release time so that it's kind of moving in time with the song. I will generally play around with this, and I actually kind of like auto a lot of the time on mastering, but we'll just play around with it and find what we like. And then you're just using your threshold to get the right amount of compression, and then makeup gain to make up any volume that you're losing. Okay, so let's go ahead and set this initially in the louder part of the song, but then we also want to check in these quieter sections of the song, like this verse over here as well. But let's start in this louder section, this chorus here.
Every day the universe expands.
I'm going to go ahead and dial it up to 2 to 1. If you're working on a really, really light song, starting at 1.5 to 1 is good, but we'll do 2 to 1 since this is a pretty rock song.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here. Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
So what I'm watching here is this meter, and I want to see that I'm getting a little bit of compression. In general, we're going to end with this hitting somewhere around 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction, which is what we're seeing on this meter, or even a little bit less, sometimes 1 to 2 decibels of gain reduction. So just kissing the meter, if you will. But we can start with it a little bit more aggressive while we're dialing in our attack and release time. So we'll get a little bit more aggressive here.
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here. Dressed in my face.
So notice that this feels a little bit choked, like it wants to get louder, but it can't.
Universe expands.
That is an example of over compression. We do not want that. This is really, really compressed here.
But I'm still standing here.
So what we want to do is find kind of where we're hearing it, but it's not way overdone.
Dressed in my face.
And now listen as I bring this attack time back at how much it changes the tone of the song. Generally speaking, with mastering, 30 milliseconds is actually on the shorter side for mastering. But I found that I typically like it on rock music as well. But you rarely are going to be using anything in these super fast ranges. But listen as I bring this to super fast, how much it impacts the drums in particular.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in
Right? What I want is to let those drums breathe, but I want to just contain them a little bit. So somewhere around 30 milliseconds, I think is the right attack time for me compared to. This feels more natural, right? Okay, so we're in a good place there. Let's go ahead and dial in the release time here.
universe expands, but I'm still standing here. Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place. So stuck in place.
So this is a fairly fast song, and so for me, I think a slightly faster release is working pretty well for me. So let's go and just dial in and pick between probably this one and this one for our release time.
First expense, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Pay attention to the drums, and when I move to this, notice that they feel like they're kind of a little bit too contained by this compression. I'll make it a little bit more extreme here so you can hear it. Listen to like the snare drum cat hit, and pay attention to that.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in place.
So that seems to be working pretty well for me. So I'm going to leave it here 30 milliseconds and 0.3, and then we're just going to bring our threshold down until we're getting the right amount of compression, which again, we're just kissing it. Maybe 2 to 3 decibels of gain reduction.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this, so stuck in place.
Cool. Okay, let's listen in a quieter section here.
All day long I get no work done. All day long I
So this is
get
off.
what have I done? Prove my worth with a nice apartment, maybe then I'll find a
Cool. Okay, I'm digging that. All right, so now we have shaped the tone, we've contained the dynamics a little bit. Now it's time to make it loud and contain the dynamics more. Inherently, to make it loud, you're going to contain the dynamics, as I said, because as you're pushing up against that loudest point, you have to inherently kind of smash those transients a little bit. And we're going to use something called a limiter for this. Now, limiter is just a brick wall limiter. It just sets a brick wall before that point where it could digitally distort, and it just doesn't let anything past it. It turns it down if it tries to get past it. So it's really a very extreme compressor. And a lot of limiters are very easy to set, but very easy to mess up at the same time. So for example, let me show you like a really overcompressed signal. So I'm going to send a lot of volume into this. I'm going to turn it down a lot so it's not crazy loud for us. And listen to this, how just overcompressed and weird this sounds.
but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep
Compared to,
racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
pay attention to the drums. If you're having trouble hearing it, pay attention to the drums when I turn this on, and notice that they just kind of get like weird and squished.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
So that is pumping. If you've ever heard people talk about that, we want to try to avoid that here. So we're going to put this back to 0. Now, the output level you want to set to -1. That is the industry standard for the loudest point that it can be. So that's bringing, here's the digital distortion. This is just setting it just below that. So this is -1 is your output level. And then you're just going to be turning up the gain, which is the volume into that. Now, this is where you want to start paying attention to your metering that's on your master track. So our RMS value, we want to be looking for -12 to -9, generally speaking. Quieter songs, you might be a little bit lower, but in that range still usually. And then on here, we're looking at our LUFS score. Now, LUFS are a kind of complicated science of a meter, but really what you're looking for is on your integrated score that you are hitting at least -14 and generally a little bit higher. So in a previous video, at that time, it was really, the understanding was that, hey, Spotify is saying -14 is the loudest that it can be. So if you go louder than that, you're stupid because they're just going to turn it down. That's not actually played out in that way quite as much over time. And so what we found is that people are still mastering, pro engineers are still mastering to -8 as a standard, as they're like on a louder song, quieter on some quieter songs. But as I mentioned, even bands like Bleachers have moved away from being quite that loud, because as you get really close to that number, you're having to smash your song way up to that meter, or up to that limit, and that's going to like destroy the dynamics as we just heard. So the secret to doing this is doing it in small amounts. So if you are starting with just a little bit of containment with compression, for example, and you've already contained it with some in your actual mix, Then on your limiter, you might be able to get by with just one limiter. But sometimes stacking limiters can help you get to that louder score without it being as obvious like we just heard, where it's really, really pumping. So let's go ahead and see where we are currently on both the RMS and the LUFS meter, and try to get closer to those numbers that our goal range is.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space.
So we're seeing about negative 18, so 19. So we can come up quite a bit to get to that minimum, like negative 12 range. And then on our LUFS score, let's see what we have here. And integrated is over a short period of time. We're just going to look at short term here since we're not listening to the whole song. But when we get done, we want to check our LUFS score integrated, which will mean over the whole song.
And I'll find a partner, prove my worth with a nice apartment maybe.
What?
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Okay, so we're seeing about negative 18. Now, my goal is negative 10-ish, maybe negative 11, but I want to get there in a way that's not hurting the sound either. So let's go ahead and use this limiter here, and I think right off the bat, I'm just going to bring it up, and I'm going to listen, and if I start to hear it in a negative way, I'm going to stop. But let's check this out here.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place. Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing.
Okay, so I'm getting closer here, but I'm not quite there yet. And I feel like I'm starting to hear it impact the drums a little bit more than I want to. It's always going to be a bit of a trade-off here, but I feel like I'm getting a little bit more than I want to. So what I want to do is try to spread out this load across two limiters. So I'm going to reduce this here to about negative 5, or plus 5, I mean. And I'm going to try to bring in a second limiter. So I'm just holding Option and clicking and dragging this down. So this is now my first limiter. This is my second limiter. And we're going to set this to negative 1 on the output level. And then I'm going to bring up the gain until I get a little bit more volume without it sounding terrible.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
Okay. So okay, let's look at how we're doing on our meters here.
The universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
So to me, it's really starting to affect the sound of the drums more than I want it to. So I'm going to settle for a slightly lower LUFS score than the ideal here, but I'm going to be happy with that because I know I'm not negatively impacting my music, and it's still going to be loud. Like, listen to how much louder this is. If I turn both of these off, listen to how much louder it is when I turn them on.
But I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Right? So I'm getting volume. It's just maybe not quite as much as I'd hoped, but that's okay, right? Okay, so we're dialing in a good amount here. I think I'm okay with this point. I've scaled it back a little
Every
bit.
day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in place, so stuck in place.
So now my last goal here is to make sure that it's not worse than the mix itself. So obviously, as I said, there's going to be a bit of a trade-off in terms of dynamics as you're pushing that volume up. So I might have a little bit more dynamics in my unlimited mix. But as I've applied this limiting, I'm going to contain that a little bit. So what I want to do now is go to my unmastered track here, and I want to listen to this. This is completely unprocessed. So it's the exact same song here, but I've not done any processing on it. And what I want to do is try to bring my mastered volume closer to this unmastered volume. So I'm just going to bring this volume fader down. A good starting point is typically 6 to 8 decibels.
Dressed in my face. Every day we keep racing through space,
This is actually a little bit louder, my unmastered. Okay, so I just want to hear here that I don't dislike the way my master sounds relative to my unmastered song, and ideally I might even like it a little bit better. So let's just listen through this verse here into this pre-chorus and chorus one time, just flipping back and forth between these. So this is the mastered.
I can't lose this one all day long. I get no work done all day long. I get what have I done? Prove my work with a nice apartment. Maybe then I'll find a partner. Prove my work with a nice apartment. Maybe then.
What?
Every day the universe expands, but I'm still standing here, dressed in my face.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, I like the tone of the mastered a little bit more. There is a little bit of the pumping that I can hear from the limiter, but not to the point that I don't like it. And in some ways, I almost like the way it sounds on the snare drum, the way it kind of fattens up the snare drum a little bit. So I am good with this, and I'm going to go ahead and hold Option and click on this to set it back to 0. And I'm going to make sure that I've selected this region. I'm going to go up to Share here, Export Song to Disk. And then we are going to go through this really quickly. So ideally, you are going to want to save it as a WAV for uploading to streaming platforms. But if you're just listening to it in your car or sharing it with your friends, an MP3 is fine. But WAV for all high fidelity, like where it's being distributed sources. And then uncompressed 24-bit. You can do 16-bit, but generally speaking, we're kind of moving towards 24-bit and higher. And then export cycle area, that means it's only going to export the selected region here. So since I've selected my song, it's only going to export that length. If you need to trim it down some, you can use the cycle region at the top and just set it just for the length of your song. So that is how you export out the song. Now, instead of doing that for you in this video, what I want to do is pull in our static mix, and I want us to listen really quickly from our earliest mix to our finished mix and then to our mastered version. So you can hear kind of the evolution of this song. So this is when we'd only set the volumes and we hadn't done any actual processing on the song. That's what this sounds like.
Every day we keep racing through space, but I'm so stuck in this.
Sounds fine, almost like a demo when you compare it to the mixed version, which is what we have here.
So stuck in this.
And then now we have this full loud version.
But I'm still standing here.
It's like a real final mixed mastered song, right? Okay, so that is mastering in GarageBand. You can see here how we've gone from raw tracks that we were recording, going through the mixing process, just incrementally doing small little tweaks, and now same thing in this mastering process, small little tweaks, and we have now shaped it into a very cohesive, professional sounding final product. So if you stick with this, you can do all this in GarageBand. It's completely possible. Now your song is going to be loud. Now it's going to be feeling up closer to those commercial releases. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of little tools that you can add in over time, but start with these 3 basic ones: EQ, compression, and limiting. And once you get a sense of those and feel confident moving through those 3 tools, then maybe try in adding in some of these other kind of advanced mastering tools, right? Okay, before you go, be sure to grab the Ultimate GarageBand Guide from the link in the description below. It's really going to help you out. As always, I'd love to hear from you. How do you approach mastering in GarageBand? Have you been doing it yourself? Have you been doing AI mastering? I'm personally not a big fan of that. Have you been using something like the Master Desk Classic? Still a great plugin, but something I moved away from because I just like to have the control and the separation of the individual stages. But Master Desk is great as well. But let me know in the comments below, how have you been approaching mastering before? And if you've never mastered before, are you going to try it after watching this video? Let me know in the comments below. If this video is helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow with the very last video in the Ultimate GarageBand Beginner's Guide series.